American identity expressed through literature. Greetings, I'm Atiyah Grandson. I'm an 18-year-old Durham Early College of Health and Sciences student. Today, my presentation discusses how American identity has evolved throughout history. My research question is, how has American identity changed throughout time as a result of the influence of immigration, power, and race? The topic of how American identity has evolved throughout time is relevant to American literature, because literature is a reflection of authors' experiences, triumphs, and values. American literature has transformed with the evolution of America as a country. Artists capture the social, political, and cultural changes of America, allowing readers to see different perspectives on identity. I studied 3 books for this essay and for this presentation. All 3 books demonstrate how identity is impacted by power, race, and culture. In This Violent Empire by Rosenberg, the book discusses the origins that form the American identity and talks about how the idea of the American is a result of exclusion. Early Americans excluded minorities and women in order to sustain white supremacy. The author emphasizes that identity in early America was performative and formulated through stories, cultural practices, and rituals, but it often excluded minority groups. Marginalized groups had to fight for belonging in early America. The oppressive history of America can be seen here. The roots of American paranoia, racism, and violence lie in the instability of Americans' national sense of self. In Akbar's Black Power, how Black Americans chose to embrace their identities is discussed. Organizations that were described in this text include the NOI, the NAACP, and the Black Panther Party. These organizations challenge equality and question the government. Akbar's text reflects the national struggle that occurs in America and how it can be hard to define what it means to be an American. Akbar also mentions that Black Americans were forced to deny their identity in order to assimilate, as seen here. Colored and Negroes suddenly grew in popularity because they downplay any association with foreign lands. This connects to the key ideas presented by Smith Rosenberg by demonstrating how minority groups face exclusion in America. Akbar's book also relates to Cummings by highlighting similarities between xenophobia and racial discrimination that immigrants experience. Cummings discusses more about immigration experiences in this book, Immigration Nation. Here's an example. Javier said that the hardest part of being an immigrant is finding the strength just to fit in. The author Akbar discusses how Black communities fight against equality, and Cummings examines the legal issues and xenophobia that occur during waves of immigration. Both the authors I mentioned highlight how the American identity is an evolving thing that has been formulated through adaptation, defiance, and more. Smith Rosenberg analyzes how exclusion is deeply rooted in the nation's foundation, while Cummings talks about how immigrants push boundaries in order to succeed. Akbar illustrated that Black Americans have shaped identity through cultural pride and activism. These texts allow people to see the different perspectives of American identity and how it has transformed throughout time. After synthesizing these 3 books, it is now clear that identity in America has transformed through resistance, oppression, and cultural empowerment. James Mercer Langston Hughes is a Black American poet who wrote poetry during the Harlem Renaissance. Hughes is one of the most influential poets of his time, and he was one of the first Black Americans to make a living from his works. His poems urge Black Americans to embrace their identities in society. In a world burdened by white supremacy, many Black Americans in his time period had disdain for their own features. It was beneficial to be perceived in likeness to whiteness because the identity of colored people in America was shamed. In The Negro Artist and Racial Mountain, Langston Hughes talks about how it is important to resist assimilation as a Black artist. He discusses how minority artists should embrace their true identities instead of appealing to whiteness in order to produce raw art that encapsulates their souls. Finally, he finishes off the text by urging Black artists to express their identity without shame, regardless of others' approval, and be free through their self-expression. He says, "We younger Negro artists who create now intended to express our individual dark-skinned selves without fear or shame. We know we are beautiful and ugly too." In conclusion, from his works, identity is dependent on a person's economic circumstance, race, and culture. Langston Hughes was a highly acclaimed writer who wrote in the 1920s during the modernist literary period and the Harlem Renaissance. The modernism period consisted of experimentation with form, individuality, and questioning identity. Modernist writers explored alienation, urban life, symbolism, and mythology while questioning traditional values. Hughes' essay titled The Negro Artist and the Racial Mountain was written during the Harlem Renaissance. And this was a cultural movement that occurred during the modernism period that embraced black art, allowing black artists to be artistically free. In the 1920s, it was characterized by Jim Crow laws, social injustices, and racial segregation. And this impacted Hughes' work because he was a minority living in America. His essay on black art challenged the perspective that minority Americans should deny their identity. He encouraged people not to conform to the idea of white is best. The way Hughes embraces jazz, black culture, and everyday life as a black American reflects the goal of the Harlem Renaissance, which is for black Americans to embrace their identity. Langston Hughes' essay encapsulates the experience of many minority Americans, which showcases that identity is a heavy impact on race and assimilation. Lessons learned. The lessons that I did learn from my research granted me with knowledge about how American identity is impacted by race, immigration, culture, and power, allowing me to observe different American identities. Many of the authors I mentioned in this presentation have contributed to my understanding of American identity by seeing how different factors impact identity. For example, immigration leads to shared cultures, and this creates identities where culture is shared across different racial groups. Power and race also play a significant part, which can be seen in Black Power and how much of the book Black Americans have varying identities depending on their ways of surviving systematic oppression. I still need to learn more about the activist organizations mentioned in Black Power, and my goal is to broaden my knowledge of the varying diversity in America and how it impacts identities. This way I can properly answer the question of how has American identity changed throughout time as a result of the influence of immigration, power, and race. Thank you for your time.